My husband left me in a freezing cabin in the middle of the woods and took all my money. That was the moment he signed his own sentence. If it were you, abandoned in the forest after surgery, with no phone, no money, and realizing the person you trusted most had been planning to leave you for months, what would you do? Leave a comment. I want to know your honest reaction. The morphine was still running somewhere in my bloodstream, making each breath feel like it dissolved into the air. I stared up at the old wooden beams on the cabin ceiling, counting each knot, each crack, because counting was so much easier than thinking about the abdominal incision that stabbed every time I inhaled. The surgery 5 days ago had been an emergency, a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. The doctor said if we'd arrived even a little later, I would have been facing a funeral full of polite, empty condolences. Grant had driven me to the hospital in a panic he later recounted, as if he were some devoted husband. I remember his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. But the way his jaw clenched, what I once mistook for worry, turned out to be something I completely misread. Not fear, but calculation. A surface-level concern masking numbers, plans, something cold beneath. The doctor was a small woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She explained the surgical procedure while Grant stood in the corner, eyes glued to his phone. At one point, she glanced at him, then at me, then at him again. A quick flicker, like she recognized a familiar pattern, something seasoned professionals spot instantly when a situation doesn't feel right. "You need complete rest for at least 2 weeks," she said, voice firm, eyes shifting back to Grant. "No driving, no lifting anything heavier than a glass of water. Someone needs to watch for fever, increased pain, redness around the incision. You will be very vulnerable." Grant nodded, wearing the face of an ideal husband. I saw the corner of his mouth lift slightly when the doctor turned away. And now, the sound of the car engine pulling away was still echoing in my ears, and my hand instinctively reached toward the nightstand for my phone. But it wasn't there. It had disappeared this morning, when Grant brought in a bowl of canned soup warmed on the cabin's old gas stove, along with 2 slices of limp white bread. "You need rest," he said, slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. "No work emails, no stress, doctor's orders." I was too exhausted to argue, too dazed from the pain meds to point out that the doctor never said anything about my phone, that resting wasn't the same as being cut off, that there's a huge difference between healing and being trapped. This cabin used to belong to my dad. He bought it 30 years ago when forest land was as cheap as a used car. 200 kilometers from the city, the road turns from logging path to trail to something barely visible to anyone who doesn't know exactly where to look. No signal, no internet, no neighbors within 10 kilometers. Just trees, wind, and a silence that once felt healing, but now pressed down on me like the lid of a coffin. I heard footsteps on the porch, Grant's shoes hitting the wood, then his voice carrying through the bedroom door. "I'm heading out now." I tried lifting myself up, the incision screaming, my teeth clenched to keep from crying out. "There's firewood by the stove," Grant continued, bright and casual, like he was checking out of a short-term rental. "Food in the pantry. Don't touch the generator. I don't want you getting shocked. 2 weeks and you'll be fine." He appeared one last time in the doorway, freshly cut hair, wearing the jacket I gave him last Christmas. "I'm going to the Maldives," he said, voice lighting up like a kid showing off a toy. "With Chloe, you know Chloe. The new coworker, blue water, overwater bungalows, champagne all day." I stared at him. The morphine was fading, the pain sharpening, and with the pain came a cold clarity sliding through my veins like melting ice. "What did you just say?" I whispered. "Vacation," he grinned. "While you recover from surgery, alone, in a cabin with no phone." He shrugged, like it was the most normal thing in the world. He repeated it again. "I'm going with Chloe." Chloe. The name hit my chest like a punch. Chloe with the blonde hair, the giggles every time Grant said her name lately. Chloe of the weekend work trips, The late-night texts I pretended not to see. I looked at him, and suddenly everything snapped into place. His wide grin, the new haircut, the excited tone like he was about to go on a honeymoon. All of it was evidence. I had been blind for too long. This morning I transferred all the savings, $480,000. Thank you for working so hard to save it. He smiled, a proud smile, like he'd just wrapped up a major project. I'll file for divorce when I get back, he said, exhaling like he was repeating something meaningless. My lawyer says it's simple. No kids, no shared assets except the apartment. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a key ring. He lifted it so the light from the doorway haloed around it, letting me see clearly the keys to our apartment. I changed the locks, he announced like laying down a winning card. This morning, same time I moved the money. You won't be able to get in anymore. Your things are in storage, Unit 247, at the facility on Highway 9. I paid for 1 month. After that, if no one claims them, they'll be auctioned off. When you get back to the city, you should probably deal with that first. He let the keys fall to the wooden floor. The sound echoed like a coin hitting the bottom of a well. Rest up, okay? Doctor's orders. By the time you drag yourself back to the city, the divorce papers will already be filed. Clean, simple. I tried to stand. A sharp wave of pain doubled me over, hands clutching my abdomen, praying it was just sweat and not blood soaking through the bandage. Why? Was all I managed to whisper. Grant tilted his head, as if pondering an interesting question. Because I can have a better life. Because I'm tired of coming home to someone who only sleeps. Because Chloe makes me laugh. Because I'm 36 and I don't want to waste another year waiting for you to wake up from your work obsession. Because opportunity came and I was smart enough to take it. The door shut. Footsteps across the wooden porch. The engine starting. I dragged myself to the window, leaning on the wall, breathing in short, shallow pulls, peering through the fogged glass. My SUV, the one I bought specifically for mountain roads. Chloe in the passenger seat, blonde hair blowing in the wind, smiling like sunshine. Grant tossed the huge suitcase into the trunk, the expensive suitcase I gave him for his birthday last year. He got in the car, started it. The headlights swept across the snow, glittering like cheap diamonds. I watched them disappear down the snow-covered trail, eyes fixed on the tire tracks fading into the forest, listening as the engine sound thinned out and became nothing more than a trembling memory. And then I smiled. And I smiled. A wide, full smile. Because Grant had made a very big mistake. He never knew I always had a second phone. The tiny silver one, always on 24/7, because I was afraid my elderly parents might have a stroke in the middle of the night. And right now, it was sitting under the bed, inside the painkiller box he never bothered to open. He'd been too busy planning his betrayal to notice anything else. I reached down, fingers shaking from pain and cold. Opened the lid, the screen lit up, battery full. And I started dialing, listening to the ringing, clear, bright, like a little miracle in the middle of the deep forest. The phone rang 3 times. Hello, it's Dad. His voice was old but still solid as stone. Dad, it's me. I'm at the cabin. For God's sake, I've been calling all week. How are you? It's a long story. Listen to me. I need you to do something for me right now. Anything. Call your contact at the international airport, the 7:30 p.m. flight to the Maldives. Report 2 passengers suspected of using a stolen credit card. Names are Grant Harrison and Chloe Bennett. A second of silence. Then Dad's voice turned ice cold. What did that man do to you? He withdrew all $480,000 of our joint savings this morning, left me here after surgery, took my phone, changed the locks at home. He's on his way to the airport with his mistress right now. Another silence, longer. When Dad spoke again, his voice had hardened into steel. All right. In 15 minutes, they'll be pulled aside for inspection. I'll send a helicopter to get you within 3 hours. Stay put, don't move too much. I told Dad everything. The whole plan that formed in my mind the moment I heard the car engine start. Everything I had suspected for months but never dared to say out loud. The pieces. The messages from Chloe that Grant deleted. The nights he silenced his notifications. The sudden meetings. The money he called work expenses. Part of me had known for a long time. Another part, the part I'd built my entire life around preparation, caution, calculation. But the surgery had thrown everything off, pushed me into this moment. When I finished, Dad went quiet for a while, then gave a short, brittle laugh, like glass cracking. "My girl, you're smarter than I ever thought. I just hoped I was wrong, Dad, but I still prepared." "It'll be done," he said. "And you, lie still. I don't want my daughter taking a single step." He hung up. I put the phone back where it was, breathing in small, steady puffs, feeling the pain shift from sharp to a dull, lingering ache, the kind you can live with. Outside, snow began falling again. Thick flakes quietly covered the tire tracks, erasing every sign of Grant driving away. I smiled, wider this time. He had no idea what was waiting for him, but he'd know soon. Pain woke me at 3 a.m. Not the incision, though it was humming its own separate song, but a different ache, right behind my sternum, pushing outward like something was trying to escape my chest. The ache of someone realizing the person they trusted most had carefully built an entire demolition factory aimed at them, as meticulously as planning a surprise birthday. I lay in the dark, listening to the cabin sigh with the wind. The fireplace was still warm. I'd added wood before bed, a habit from childhood summers. But the cold still crept through the cracks, testing every gap, exactly the way Grant had been doing to me for months. How long had he been planning this? The question circled my mind like a vulture. How many mornings had he sat across from me, eating breakfast, kissing me lightly before work, then walking out the door, already thinking about how to abandon me? I traced the timeline, fitting together every scattered piece of evidence from the past year like a crime scene. The weekend work trips that never existed, the deleted texts, the times he said, "Let me handle the finances." All of it now stood in plain view. And I smiled in the darkness, even as tears slid down my temples. Chloe had only been at his company for 3 months, but the distance between Grant and me had started long before that. Maybe a year, maybe more. It didn't explode all at once. It eroded, subtle and quiet, like the natural wear of a marriage people often mistake for just a rough patch. Grant gradually stopped asking about my day, stopped telling me about his, stopped touching me first, and then, when I tried to initiate, he only responded with reluctance, disinterest, as if it were an obligation he had to fulfill. I told myself he was stressed. His job was demanding. A project manager at a tech company, always dangling between getting fired and hoping for promotion. I convinced myself we were just going through a bad phase, that every couple had one, that we just needed to reconnect, needed a vacation, or therapy. 6 months ago, I brought up therapy over dinner at his favorite Italian place. He looked at me like I'd suggested we both commit a crime. "Therapy?" he said, fork frozen in midair. "Why therapy?" "Because I think we need help communicating better." "I communicate fine. You're the one always buried in your feelings." And that was the end of that conversation. Looking back now, everything is painfully obvious. The avoidance, the way he twisted the narrative to make my worry feel like a flaw in me. How many times did that happen? How many moments did I reach across the widening gap between us, trying to save something he'd already stepped out of? I thought about the savings, $480,000, the money I'd scraped together over 5 years. Bit by bit, 500 here, 1,000 there, whatever remained after rent, bills, and the sky-high cost of city life. But Grant had a different plan. He watched that number grow from 50,000 to 100,000 to 200,000. And he saw something entirely different. Not a future, but an exit. I wondered when he decided. When the balance hit, what amount? At what moment did he look at it and think, "This is enough. Enough to leave. Enough to start over." Enough to build some fantasy life with someone who isn't tired, isn't complicated, isn't me. The scariest thing was how smart he was. How he arranged everything so neatly, like a blueprint. The ectopic pregnancy surgery was real. The doubled-over pain in the kitchen 5 days ago was something no one could fake. The emergency run to the OR, all of it was real. But Grant saw opportunity in my emergency. He realized a woman who just had surgery is someone vulnerable, dependent, easy to isolate. Maybe he'd been waiting for a moment like this all along, a moment he could act without fearing I'd fight back in time. The cabin trip, the place to recover, was his idea. 3 days after surgery, when I was still groggy from exhaustion and grief, he sat beside my hospital bed, stroked my hair, and gently suggested I go rest in the woods, away from the city noise. "It's your dad's cabin," he said. "Quiet, clean, no pressure. You'll heal faster." I was touched, foolishly touched. I thought everything I had worried about before had been a misunderstanding, anxiety of my own making. The doctor didn't think so. I remember now. She frowned when Grant explained the plan and asked the hard questions. How far was the cabin from a hospital? What if complications happened? Who would care for me? Could I manage the wound care myself? Grant smiled smoothly, answered like a trained actor. "I'll stay with her. I've taken a month off." His voice was soft, steady, warm, like a promise. And I, stupidly, believed him. The sound of a helicopter echoed from far away, then grew louder, like a heartbeat pounding through the snowy forest. I sat by the window, watching the red and white aircraft descend into the clearing in front of the cabin, its blades whipping the snow into a blinding mini-storm. The door opened, and David Grant stepped out. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a long black coat, his face stern, but his eyes carrying a familiarity. He had once been security for my family's company, the man who saved my father from a threat 10 years ago, and now he was the first person Dad had called. He moved quickly through the snow, his boots sinking deep but never slowing. "Evelyn, your father called me," David said as he shut the door behind him. "He said you were in danger," his voice low and warm but sharp as a blade. His hands were gentle but firm as he helped me up, draping his coat over my shoulders. He smelled faintly of leather and cigarette smoke, the scent of someone used to emergencies. I let out a short laugh, a broken sound, sharp like a shard of ice. "I don't think danger is an exaggeration at all." David scanned the cabin slowly, methodically. The kitchen, the window, the fireplace, then the empty space where my phone should have been. "He took all your communication?" I nodded. David frowned. A small frown, but precise like a knife cut. "Classic. Isolation. First step of control." I steadied myself against the table, dizziness brushing past me. "Grant isn't the kind of person, violent." "Evelyn." He pulled out a chair, motioning for me to sit. "There are many forms of violence. Not all of them leave bruises." I stayed quiet. David walked a slow circle around the cabin, touching the things Grant had left behind. A few cans of food, firewood, the ridiculous instruction sheet he'd taped to the cabinet like he was briefing a house sitter. Limited food, insufficient medication, no vehicle, no signal, no phone. David listed each one in a flat, steady voice. "He didn't just leave you. He structured it so you'd disappear." I felt each word like salt on the still raw incision. David pulled a chair in front of me, sat down, his hands resting on his thighs, calm enough that he seemed to be reviewing a familiar case file. "I've seen this before," he said, "with my sister. Her husband controlled the money, controlled the friends, eventually cut her off from the family. She thought it was care, but it was isolation. By the time she realized, it was too late." We boarded the helicopter, and he buckled my seatbelt the way someone would for a child, then signaled the pilot to lift off. Outside, the wind roared, snow slashing against the windows. But for the first time since Grant drove away, I didn't feel buried. Morning sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting long gold bars across the wooden floor. It should have been a peaceful morning, but the moment my eyes opened, the room spun. I was still sleeping in the living room. There was no way I was stepping into the master bedroom. I couldn't stand the thought of lying on the same sheets Grant had used to betray me. The clothes I wore were old things pulled from the back of the closet. Faded university sweatpants and a hoodie that still smelled faintly of fabric softener from a different life. But I was no longer the woman abandoned in a cabin. Something sharp and clear had sliced through the fog I'd been living in for years, and I knew exactly who I needed to call. Rachel Evans picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn? Oh my God. It's been forever since I heard your voice." I didn't waste time. "Rachel, I need a lawyer, and I need one now." There was a pause. Then her voice shifted instantly into the tone I remembered from years ago. Cold, focused, sharp as a scalpel. "Are you in danger?" "No, but Grant left me in the middle of a snowy forest. No phone, no caregiver after surgery. He drained our joint account. I found evidence he's been planning this for months, and I don't know what else he's taken." Another pause. Then Rachel said, "Don't leave the house. I'm coming now." An hour later, Rachel stood at my door, still in yoga clothes, hair in a messy bun, but her eyes carried the confidence of someone who'd taken down men bigger and meaner than Grant before breakfast. She brought a leather case, an iPad, and an energy that made me feel, for the first time, that I was no longer alone in this nightmare. "Show me everything," she said, skipping any kind of greeting. I took her through it all. Grant's empty closet, the missing suitcase, the jewelry box without my grandmother's ring, the cold, polished draft email in the trash folder. Divorce will be good for both our personal growth. And most importantly, the bank transactions. Rachel scrolled through the statements on my phone, her eyebrows lifting. "He transferred everything the same day he abandoned you. This is dissipation of marital assets, the intentional depletion of marital property. Courts despise this." My heartbeat thudded hard. "Really?" "Really," she said, firm and certain. "Marriage is a legal partnership. You can't secretly withdraw money, hide assets, pretend everything's fine while planning your escape, especially in your situation. He broke the law." Rachel opened her tablet, flipping through state statutes, explaining terms like asset freeze, forensic accounting, temporary maintenance. It was like watching her assemble a legal weapon, piece by piece from precedents and codes. She looked at me, her eyes softening just slightly. "Now it's time to take everything back." She glanced around the house. "The house is under both your names?" "Both," I said. "Good. Don't move out. If he tries anything when he returns, I'll file for exclusive occupancy. But for now, this house is leverage. We're going to freeze the assets and secure every document." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Photograph every document in this house. I'm going to build the timeline. His trip was supposedly for your recovery, right?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Then he didn't just leave. He lured you out of the city to finish the trap." "Yes, Grant hadn't just ended a marriage. He had staged a disappearance. My disappearance. But I was still here. Monday morning hit like headlights shining straight into the truth. Bright, harsh, exposing, and impossible to avoid. I stood in front of the county court, back straight, heels planted firmly on the ground, Rachel on my left, David Grant on my right. David wore a black suit, jaw clenched like stone. Rachel was in a steel blue suit and razor-sharp stilettos, the kind you don't wear to negotiate, but to end things. And me, I chose the most formal outfit I owned. Clean lines, high collar, no jewelry, no color. Just me, holding myself up with the same hands Grant once tried to make useless. "You ready?" Rachel asked, voice low. I nodded. Inside the courthouse, the sound was a mixture of heels hitting tile and murmured conversations. I saw Grant before he saw me. He was seated beside his lawyer, a tall, silver-haired man in a custom suit, radiating the arrogance of someone who charges 6 figures per case. Grant had put his Rolex back on, the one I gave him last year. His face was freshly shaved, his smile polite, as if he were here to settle a small misunderstanding between 2 reasonable adults. "Don't look at him," Rachel whispered, leaning in. "Every glance is an invitation. You're not here to talk. You're here to win." The judge entered. Valerie Steele, stern, concise, known for slicing through theatrics like a scalpel. I liked her immediately. The emergency hearing began. Rachel stood first, presenting the motion to freeze all marital assets, grant me exclusive use of the home, and award temporary support. She laid out the timeline without mercy. The recovery trip Grant insisted on right after my pregnancy loss, the withdrawal of funds before he disappeared, leaving me in a forest cabin post-surgery with no phone, no car, no warning. Then she submitted the cold email draft from his trash folder. Grant's lawyer shifted in his chair. When it was their turn, he tried to soften everything. "Your Honor, this was a mutual decision. My client left due to urgent work matters." Judge Steele interrupted, voice flat but sharp. "Let me understand. The respondent emptied the joint account, abandoned his wife after emergency surgery, in an isolated location with no vehicle, no phone, and no notice. What nature of urgent work matter justifies that?" Grant's lawyer stuttered. Grant stood, using the sweet tone he used when pitching to investors. "Your Honor, we'd been struggling for months. I just wanted us both to have space. I didn't think she'd feel abandoned. I thought she'd call friends. I miscalculated." "Miscalculated?" the judge repeated, her tone bone dry. "And the money?" she asked. Grant paused. Just a beat, but enough to reveal he was constructing a lie. "It was for work," he said. Rachel rose instantly. "We request proof. Receipts, transfers, anything that shows the money was used for business, rather than for his planned disappearance." The judge nodded. "You will provide it." Then she turned to Grant. "Mr. Harrison, abandoning your wife under those circumstances and draining shared assets does not paint you favorably. I grant the petitioner's motion. All marital assets are hereby frozen pending forensic financial review. Mrs. Evelyn Harrison is granted exclusive use of the marital home and temporary support of $4,000 per month until final judgment. Hearing adjourned." Grant's face cracked for exactly 1 second, just long enough for me to see the flash of rage behind his eyes. Good. He thought he'd walk away with everything, the money, the house, and the narrative he fed everyone. Today was the first time he was forced to answer for anything. That evening, Grant called. I let it ring 4 times before putting it on speaker. David sitting across from me, arms crossed, eyes locked on the phone. "Evelyn." Grant's voice was tight as a stretched wire. "What the hell are you doing?" "I'm exercising my rights," I said, surprisingly calm. He exhaled hard. "You had to humiliate me in court, in front of my lawyer, in front of investors. Do you know what you're destroying?" "You mean the things you destroyed first? Leaving your wife in a cabin after surgery, draining our money, changing the locks?" Silence. Then his voice softened, the familiar softness that once made me melt. "Listen, we both made mistakes. I handled things badly, I admit that. But dragging this into court helps no one. You're angry, I get it. Let's meet, talk like adults, no lawyers." David sliced his hand across his throat. "Don't fall for it. I didn't. All communication goes through Rachel from now on. Anything you want to say it to her." Grant's tone hardened. "Don't be stupid. You think she actually cares about you? She just wants to drag this out to make money." I looked at the speakerphone, picturing Grant's charming smile, his clean suit, his honeyed voice. "She's done more for me than you ever did." "Evelyn." Grant lowered his voice to that careful register where affection and manipulation blurred. "This doesn't have to get worse." "It's already worse," I said. "And not because of me." I hung up. I set the phone on the table. My hands didn't shake, My voice didn't break, but my heart thudded loud enough to hear in my ears. Grant did not stop. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. David checked the peephole first, then let out a low, drawn-out groan. "Evelyn, your mother-in-law is here." Linda Harrison, always polished like she'd stepped out of an advertisement for elite country clubs, stood at the door in a luxurious beige trench coat, holding a ribbon-tied box of cookies. "Are you sure you want to open it?" David asked. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then opened, but kept the security chain on. "Evelyn, darling," Linda cooed, so sweet it froze the air. "I was just in the area and wanted to bring some cookies. Your favorite, almond lemon?" "I don't think this is a good time, Linda," I said, my voice neutral, neither warm nor cold. Her smile stretched tight. "I know things are tense, but we're still family. I love you. Grant made mistakes, yes, but all this legal conflict is hurting everyone. Not even 30 seconds, and the guilt strike had already landed." "He hurt himself," I replied. "I'm simply responding." Linda's eyes drifted into the house, scanning everything as if assessing damage. "This isn't you, Evelyn. You've always been calm, rational. This bitterness doesn't suit you." I almost laughed. "Seeking justice isn't bitterness. It's self-respect." Linda sighed dramatically. "Think about the relationship you two built, about your future, your reputations. If you push too far, everything could collapse." I looked straight into her eyes. The woman who once called me daughter of the house was now reminding me that my existence was inconvenient. Not once did she say Grant was wrong. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she mention the child soon to be born. "I'm protecting myself," I said. "Something I should have done long ago." Linda lowered her voice, almost whispering. "I just think, perhaps, you don't need all that money. You're smart, independent, you'll land on your feet, but Grant won't." Her smile cracked like shattered porcelain. I closed the door, not hard, but firm. I let out a weak laugh, but inside, what rose wasn't laughter. It was resolve. They would try to pressure me. Grant, Linda, his lawyer, maybe even some mutual acquaintances. But I had crossed a line I would never go back from. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the woman I was becoming. 1 week later, the truth arrived. Not as whispers or suspicions, but as a thick folder Rachel placed on my kitchen table. "Sit," she said, the corner of her mouth lifting. Not a smile, but the expression of a lawyer who has just found the knife an enemy used to stab her client, covered in fingerprints and signatures. "What you're about to read," Rachel tapped the folder, "will make your blood boil, but it also gives you the strongest bargaining position I've seen in years." I sat. The first page was the report summary from the forensic financial expert. One line jumped out immediately: undeclared marital assets exceeding $1.4 million. I blinked. He always said the company was barely staying afloat, I whispered. Rachel nodded, her face darkening. Turns out Harrison and Build wasn't just staying afloat. 3 years ago, they secured a state contract worth $25 million per year, for 5 years, and that's just the visible part. She turned the page. I saw property documents, investment accounts, transfers to an offshore fund in the Cayman Islands, 2 shell companies with very familiar initials. CB, Chloe Bennett. He hadn't just hidden money. He had built an entirely new life, one that didn't include me. There's a house in Arizona, Rachel said, flipping further, bought in cash, a condo in Miami under the offshore company, a Tesla registered under a company Chloe formed last year. And guess who paid the insurance? My breath caught. Our joint account, right? Rachel nodded. Something inside my chest snapped. Not broke, not shattered, but snapped. The final thread tying me to the man I once believed was good. There's more, Rachel said, her voice lowering. He's been preparing for this for a long time. Timing large purchases when you were least likely to check accounts, hiding documents in encrypted cloud storage. And this. She placed a draft contract in front of me. He pre-wrote a property division agreement in your name. The signature was forged. My jaw clenched. He forged my signature? He tried. It wouldn't have held up in court, but if you hadn't contested the divorce, if you'd agreed to a quiet settlement, he would have gotten away with it. I stared at the pages, heat spreading from my chest outward. This wasn't just betrayal. This was strategic theft, calculated step by step. We sat for more than an hour building the response. When it was done, Rachel placed the counterproposal in front of me, so sharp that even I flinched a little reading it. A dense, polished legal document, precise as a scalpel. Grant must repay the full $480,000 he withdrew illegally within 30 days. Forfeit all rights to marital assets, including the house and any returned funds. Cover 100% of attorney fees and all legal costs for the divorce. Return all assets hidden over the past 2 years. The Arizona house, the vehicle registered under the offshore company, the Cayman account, the transfers under Chloe's initials. Pay me 60% of those accounts. He won't sign, I said softly. Rachel let out a cold laugh. He will, if he doesn't want to go to prison. I stayed quiet, trying to see whether the plan crossed a line, the line between justice and cruelty. But I found no excess. Grant stole from me, left me to freeze and suffer post-surgery, and tried to erase me from his life. Now he was facing the natural consequences of his own choices. Do it, I said. Rachel nodded, stacked the documents neatly, and slid them into her leather case. I'll send this to his lawyer. If he's smart, he'll sign. If he doesn't, then we proceed with the divorce on your terms. Civil suit, damages, criminal charges if applicable. We burn down every exit he thought he had. She paused, then added, but I think he'll sign. Grant calculates everything. He'll see this is the least destructive option. Rachel stood, rolling her shoulders slightly. You should rest. Tomorrow you meet with the financial specialist, and you'll need clarity. They want to fast-track the audit, finish the asset inventory before the end of the week instead of the end of the month. I nodded. I'll be ready. Before leaving, Rachel hesitated at the door. Evelyn, I know you're hurting from the betrayal, but you need to understand something. You found out 5 years earlier. Earlier than if you'd had children. Earlier than when everything became irreversible. So, hurting like this is still a kind of luck. I exhaled. I think so too. She left. I heard the click of her heels in the hallway, her voice on the phone, the rapid tapping of her keyboard. Everything she did had structure, order, certainty. I lay down on the sofa, staring up at the ceiling. I tried to locate the emotions gathering in my chest. Anger, bright and hot, like a freshly lit fire. Pain, deep and heavy like a weight in my ribs. Loss, not for Grant, but for the version of myself who once believed in him. But beneath all of it was the hardest thing to name. Relief. Freedom. This marriage had been dead for a long time. I felt that now. The distance, the silence, the avoidance, the half-hearted conversations about improving, resting, therapy, vacations. They were all my attempts to keep alive something that had already ended. Grant cut the cord first, in the cruelest way possible. But he cut it. And I, finally no longer had to pretend. No longer had to hold together a house that had become nothing but compromise. No longer had to shrink myself to fit the comfort of someone who no longer loved me. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and for the first time in years, felt myself standing in my own life, no longer performing as the patient wife, the naive wife, the hopeful wife. Just me, and the road ahead, one I was choosing for myself. Monday, we walked into the downtown law office, air conditioning hissing, black espresso in glass cups. Grant stood when I entered, thinner, paler, as if stress had been gnawing at him. Evelyn, he began in that familiar sweet tone, I think we can resolve this amicably if— I lifted my hand. Save your breath. Rachel set the folder on the table. Here is our position. Full disclosure of all assets. A 60-40 division of anything concealed during the marriage, plus retroactive support and all legal fees paid by Mr. Harrison. Grant's lawyer scoffed. Ridiculous. Rachel smiled politely. It's the law. They gave their counteroffer. $200,000, a non-disclosure agreement, and the house. I almost laughed. 2 years of hiding millions, and now he wanted to buy my silence with 1 year's worth of rent money. 200,000, I said slowly. For me to disappear after you hid $1.4 million in marital assets and left me in a cabin like roadkill? Grant leaned forward, voice lowering. Most of it isn't liquid. It's tied up in the company. His face changed. The confident smile vanished. His shoulders sagged. Even his lawyer lost his swagger. We stood to leave. Evelyn, Grant said louder, almost desperate. You don't have to do this. We can work it out. Just the two of us. I turned, looked straight at him. The old version of me, I said, might have listened, might have forgiven. But she died in that gas station parking lot 3 weeks ago. The final hearing was short, cold, and merciless. Judge Chin read the ruling like a surgical incision. Grant Harrison was found to have concealed marital assets, forged documents, and intentionally deceived his wife. The court ordered, Evelyn Harrison receives 60% of all declared and discovered assets, over $1.2 million, full ownership of the house, plus $500,000 in punitive damages. Grant said nothing. He just sat there, face drained, hands clenched white at the knuckles. When the judge struck the gavel, he kept staring ahead, as if staying perfectly still might make everything disappear. But it didn't. Everything was over, just not in the way he expected. 3 weeks later, the transfers were complete. The house was officially mine. Grant's name was erased from the deed. He signed everything, paid everything, vanished into whatever new life he thought he wanted. Whether with Chloe or not, I no longer cared. Everything, legally and materially, was now mine, and only mine. I repainted the front door forest green, the color of peace, the color of beginnings. Then I called Dad, David, and Rachel over. We sat in the backyard all night, planning the nonprofit. Not revenge, a purpose, a fund to help women leave controlling or financially abusive relationships. Money, lawyers, housing, a voice. We named it Project Rainlight, because I was reborn in loneliness, left behind, and lifted myself anyway. David became head of security and operations. Rachel offered pro bono legal aid for the first clients. Dad handled the paperwork. We opened quietly but firmly. That night, I lay down on a new bed in my new home, listening to my breath even out. Tomorrow would bring the final signatures, the ink that closed a long chapter, painful, transformative, necessary. And after that, what? After that, I would learn how to be happy, learn how to build a life based on what I wanted, not what I was trying to survive. Learn how to be a woman who was hurt but refused to let the hurt define the rest of her life. I imagined waking up tomorrow without thinking of Grant, sipping coffee on the balcony, texting Rachel to ask if she wanted dinner, taking the old chaotic stack of paperwork into my office, sorting it page by page, feeling like I was reclaiming pieces of myself. I would start living each day as a beginning, not a recovery. I would learn how to truly live instead of merely endure. Outside, life continued in its rush. Millions of people with their own stories, their pains, their silent battles between choosing anger or choosing healing. I chose healing, not because I was noble, but because anger was too exhausting, and I was far too tired. I closed my eyes. In the darkness, I felt the weight in my chest lighten a little. Not entirely, not suddenly, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to hope. Enough to believe that what lay ahead might actually be better than what I had just walked through. The incision had healed. The house was mine. The money was being returned. Justice had been served. Now came the harder part, continuing to live. But I was ready. Or I would be, soon.